Ballinlough Lake. Ballinlough Lake prior to 1890. Ballinlough Lake, situated in the parish of Ballinakill on OS map Galway 126, has a history which is both interesting and unique. In the annals of the Four Masters, we find reference to Ballinlough. It was then regarded as a lake of intrinsic beauty, being one of the best for swimming and boating in the Woodford-Ballinakill vicinity. In the annals, we also find reference to 3 small islands on the lake, one of which was called Millhouse Island. Records show that a cronogh on the lake was inhabited by Mr. Ulick Burke in 1585. He reached the mainland by means of stepping stones or causeway. Over a century ago, the fate of Ballinlough Lake was sealed, and memories of that night were deep-rooted by the people living along its banks up to the middle of the present century. That January night of 1890 struck much terror into the people of Maglass, as did the night of the big wind, also on a January night 51 years before. The landslide occurred about midnight. A heavy snowfall followed by torrential rain made the Lochatoric bog desperately wet. The lower portion of the banks began to slip away from the rock underneath, exposing large tracts of rock layers. The land did not move in a complete mass, but in long, narrow ridges, each about half to 1 square perch in size. The bog moved in ridges, leaving narrow necks of earth behind, which in many cases toppled over. The whole mass moved from a 600-foot contour, following the course of a mountain stream. It crossed the Lochatoric North Road, where today a bridge stands. Ross Duffy, returning from Woodford after a card game, arrived on the scene a little after midnight. He heard the rumbling sound of the cascading, swollen river, accompanied by whistling, which country people associate with eels. The road or causeway was impassable, so he had to make a detour to his house at the back of Mr. Donoghue's. The river raced on, carrying his Petey's load on its back until it reached lower ground near the present Eddie Page's. The bridge at Eddie Pierce was carried away, and the swirling, muddy waters lapped the doorstep of Mr. Meany's house. As the river proceeded along the Maglass lowlands, turf banks were deposited along its banks, which in fact provided fuel for the villagers for some years afterwards. Mud, silt and red sandstone were also left behind. Finally, the landmass emptied itself into the Ballinlough Lake, and here a great amount of it came to rest. 2/3 of the 200-acre lake was covered by sinewy bog, which came within 6 to 12 feet of the surface. One of Ireland's most beautiful lakes was destroyed. Perrott, who described the lake in the latter part of the last century, tells us that Sir Henry Burke of Marble Hill estimated the waters to be 80 feet deep. In 1890, the depth was drastically reduced. At the moment, no possible convenient way of measuring its depth can be found, so the mystery lies, shrouded in peat and mud. In 1897, Lewis visited the area. He compared the landslide to that of the Kerry Bog, which moved under similar conditions some years before. There was complete absence of herb life along the rock face where the slide had occurred. Traces of turf banks, silt and sandstone were still to be seen along the Maglass River. the rugged turf banks appeared in Ballinlough Lake itself. Now we come to the second phase in history of Ballinlough Lake. Some years ago, the outlet river from Ballinlough Lake was deepened by the Board of Works. This was part of the Shannon drainage scheme. Giant dredgers were used to level the lake outlet. The bed of the river was lowered by 12 feet. Dams, rocks and planks held the lake waters at bay until work was nearing completion. On a night in March, the waters of Ballinlough once more raised their heads in fury, and tearing through the dam once more raced onward, this time to the Shannon. Next morning, Ballinlough Lake had disappeared. The Sunday after the disappearance of Ballinlough Lake saw as many sightseers in the vicinity as did the landslide before. As the people picked their way along the muddy, slimy banks, large shells were visible protruding from the surface. A number of those were collected by a local student, Patrick White of Ballycorban, who took them to the Ballinakill school teacher for examination. The shells were quite large, measuring up to 3 to 4 inches in length. Some were single shells, whilst others were domed, resembling large oyster shells. The teacher took the shells to Mr. Pádraig Keady, Professor of Marine Biology in UCG. He identified the shells as being those of freshwater mussels. Shells of this kind are common in inland waters. Many specimens have been found in the Corrib, the Boyne, and in the many lakes of Cavan, Lough Ochsor, and the Annalee. An interesting aspect of them is that they sometimes contain pearls. Pearls have been found in mussel shells in the Uachtarard and Mycullen area. Many references have been made to the fertilizer potential of Ballinlough. In the O'Flaherty book, we find accounts of the marl found in the area. This marl was dug up on the shores of the lake and spread on the hills of Cregeen, most commonly known as Marble Hill. This marl proved to be an excellent manure. In fact, the land was divided down to the lake so that each farmer could have a portion for himself. Since the disappearance of the lake, no fowlers or fishermen venture near the lake. Trees now blanket the area where Ballinlough Lake once reigned. Hereunder is a letter written by Bridget E. Duggan of my class to Thomas Murray in America at the end of January 1890. Dear Uncle Thomas, it is hard to describe the runaway bog as we call it. On the night of the 20th of January 1890, it gave away. The neighbours there went to bed on Friday night, and when they got up on Saturday morning, the place was all covered with bog and big blocks of dale. It was up to Keown's door and to Pat Dervin's. That's the house the Regans live in. Do you remember the lake that was between Fardy Kavanagh's and the old chapel in the Loch Mountain? All the water that was in that lake ran away, and a lot of the mountain turned into it, and about 3 miles in circumference around that hollow ran down along to Attipirish. Going far into the valley, it destroyed the soil convenient to the river and surrounded pits of potatoes on each side of the river until it went into Ballinlough Lake. It continued to come for 3 to 4 days. It rained all day on Sunday, and at night, about 12 o'clock, the flood raised very high, and the people of Attipirish prepared to leave their houses. The sort of a flood it was, a thick sludge mixed with the solid pieces of the mountain, sticks and blocks of deal. There is a bridge on the Lago Road at Atty Pierce. They crossed the bridge and filled that place entirely. It went far down on Pat Cleary's. It went below the lane that leads to the Lago Road, and also on the Myglass Meadows. And it went to Mr. Higgs' hall door. That is Burke's house, your landlord formerly, and filled half Ballinlough Lake, and continues there in a black sludge. It was noticed passing by Killaloo in the Shannon. The people here cut turf on it this year, any place that was not too deep. No person could understand what it is, but them that sees it. I remain your niece, Bridget E. Duggan.